Okay, we did it. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. Okay. All right. So we have about 1 hour or 45 minutes with.
You're supposed to go maximum for an hour.
Yeah, we will see. No problem. No problem. Okay. So, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming and taking your time to keep me company. And I understand it's Thursday evening, so in the olden days, and Mahmoud Street, everything was open, but we'll see. Now I'm here. I'm still here after 25 years. As you know, this was our favorite campus. Some of my friends also came because this was my favorite campus, and still is my favorite campus to this day. The new campus is very nice, but I don't feel at home there. I feel at home here, and since I live in Garden City, it's basically quasi-home, sort of. Okay, I gladly so-called volunteered the time and effort for the students in the department also of AUC of saying something about this topic of morality and freedom. Now, morality and freedom as a topic, I did not choose because I had nothing else to say. It goes way, way back, actually, the topics that deals with ethics, morality, and what have you. I already dealt with this in my dissertation a long time ago. I will not tell you the year. It was several decades ago. And this was a dissertation, I believe it's in the internet somewhere. Somebody found it. I have no idea how and whatever. It was an analytical ethics and ethos. And right at that time, I admit I was 25. I was always very interested in the interplay between philosophy and what they call the social sciences. So it's very obvious if you're interested in ethics and morality in this area, you have to be interested in sociology, anthropology, history, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. For a very simple reason, morality doesn't grow in a vacuum. And some of these things I'm saying here is based upon, I'm old enough, on my own experience in life. There are certain things that you learn in life that are very useful, particularly when you deal with morality and ethics and what have you. So this dissertation that was a long time ago, ethics and ethos. The reason I mentioned that, not to advertise, I'm not the type, some of you know, I'm not a PR man. This is not my thing. I'm myself, so I don't need PR. Is because I was very interested in, when you're a little bit younger, 20, 25, you start thinking a little bit, why do people behave the way they do? Why are they so funny sometimes, And if you have the opportunity of traveling, which I had, and don't grow up in the village only and see the world a little bit, you just noticed very clearly, that certain types of people are a little bit different from you, not only the way they look, but also the way they behave and the way they do things or how they decide things. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense to me, and then you ask yourself, well, how come it doesn't make any sense to you? Why do they decide this way? So it must make sense to them. So you have to find out, and you are on your way of becoming a philosophy guy or a philosophy lady, very, very clearly. Because you want to find out, why is it that another person decides this way and then another way? And so my approach to this issue, morality and freedom, and I still will say something about morality, is a universal approach. I do this on purpose, universal approach. The cultural aspect is secondary for a very simple reason. My universal approach, this is not it's life experience, is that when you speak about morality, you always have to presuppose, and it's a very important issue, that morality is for human beings. animals do not have a morality. This table here doesn't have a morality. This building doesn't have a morality, and the airplane doesn't have a morality, and space at large, as far as I know, is morally neutral. It doesn't exist. So it seems to be very clear that morality as such is something for human beings, very specifically. So I would, as I proceed step by step, I would set up a thesis. As I said, we could spend 5 hours, I assure you. We're not finished yet, but we have to reduce ourselves, whatever. I would say the following. When you combine morality and freedom, then you can say the following. And I try to demonstrate this in terms of examples, historical examples, sociological examples, something anthropology, a little bit philosophy from time to time. And that is, the more morality you push, the more oppression appears. And the more freedom you push, the more chaos appears. And some people talk about fitna. Meaning, this morality and freedom issue is a very sensitive issue in terms of the human being as a person, we as human beings, as persons. So if you have too much of one, then there's negatives. So the whole idea is to find a sort of balance between the two in order to somehow to handle this. And of course, I refer in my presupposition as what is a human being, because this is a very important issue. When you talk about morality and freedom and these kind of topics, you always have to ask yourself, for whom is this good? I mean, for whom? For my dogs, or for my cats, or for my camel, or for my horse, for my donkey, or what? No, morality in the understood definition, which I come to very soon, and not to mention, of course, freedom particularly, is exclusively for the human being. And now we come into philosophy a little bit. Aristotle, of course, had this so-called famous definition where he says the human being is such, the anthropos, that's what the whole idea of anthropology comes from, the anthropos, or the anthropoi, they are rational animals. Meaning they're animal, they're rational in the sense, and it's not a value judgment, it is a fact. Meaning what do these people, these anthropoi, what they do have in common with animals? Many, many things we have in common with them, no? But then at the end, this is classic, he comes to the conclusion, there's one decisive difference between them and us, and that is rationality, the rationality aspect that animals do not have. The animals, by observation, and those of you who have cats and dogs, and maybe donkeys and camels, who know very well by experience and observation that they do follow nature generally. It's not as though they follow the chaotic situation. No, they follow nature and all this, but they do not definitely show rationality. Very clearly not. There is communication among cats and all so forth, but it's only the human being as such, who's capable of language. And I have to add a little footnote to this. Language is very important for the human being. That too is communication, but language specifically very important, because language gives us the opportunity to make decisions as to, a baby, for instance, does not yet use language, and in that sense they're a little bit like little animals. They just make noises and what have you, but that is not language, making noise. Meaning a sentence, for instance, as you follow and observe little children when they grow up, 2, 3, 4 years, suddenly at one point, pop, they show up and then they say something, a little sentence. They're not aware that they're saying a sentence, but it is a sentence. And Aristotle here says very clearly, he says, I'm combining development psychology with some insights of Aristotle here. That is, we are capable of asking a question. Is it true or is it not true? Yes or no? That is what language enables us. And just making noise, like a baby and all that, that doesn't help us very much. The baby's noise, imagine you ask the baby, who is your father? And the baby will cry on it and maybe points to the wrong guy and there is troubles in paradise. No? But if the little child is 3, 4, 5 years old, they can tell very straightforward, oh, yeah, Ahmed is my father, is my papa, or whatever, you know, or Mariam is my mother. Here, everything is clear. And then, of course, you can ask the question, is that true, is it not true? So there's an identity. So this is the presupposition, clearly, for what is a rational animal. The next aspect, of course, because I'm working into how do we get into morality. I mean, that's the whole idea. No? So the presupposition, first of all, for basic morality is that it is for human beings, or rational animals. And that rational animal, of course, is also a social animal. Or Aristotle also have another definition. He talked about political animal, the political animal. No? Now, this issue, again, the political, for some of you, the term of politics, of course, comes from the Greek term polis, no? Not police, polis. That means the city. And in Greek philosophy, Aristotle, what have you, he identifies very clearly that the so-called rational animal is also active as a political animal, meaning somebody active in the polis. No? And this makes him a social animal and a political animal at the same time. The interesting part of this is, of course, that this so-called social and political animal has to organize itself, basically. And so it is very clear that a certain kind of habits, in Latin mores, morality, mores, that's where the English language stole their vocabulary from. And those of you who know English much better than I do know very well that almost 80% of the English vocabulary that the British stole, or the Americans stole even more so, comes from Latin and Greek when it comes to science, philosophy, and you name it. You know? A name like axe is Anglo-Saxon, but it's not very philosophical. Anyway, so this is an important issue here. So this morality, first of all, refers to the mores, to the habits, to the behaviors, the way that rational animal behaves in an organization, as a social animal, as a political animal. No? And this is an important point, because here you have to ask yourself, why does this animal, this rational animal, this political animal, this social animal, why does this animal need to develop, I say need to develop, and not wants to develop, but needs to develop kinds of behaviors that seems to be congenial then to their ways of life, meaning like institutions, for instance, like family. Of course, the basics of the animal includes, of course, reproduction. That's what Aristotle meant here. When it comes to reproduction, we're still animals. We're not human beings. Still animal aspects here. The basic biology is still at work here. But once we start organizing this, to put it in simple language, who with whom, and all this, then things become a little bit more complicated, because then you get the sociology introduced. The sociology, the politics introduced. And one with the other is actually not really connected. Because I always say to the students, whether they like it or not, I mean, to reproduce, you don't have to be married. That's not a presupposition in terms of biology. Of course, I have to explain that sometimes. We're in Egypt, no? Not to all of them, but some of them. No? And the reason I say this not with a sense of humor, of course. In human life, you have to have a sense of humor. If you don't show a sense of humor, you have a big problem. You know? Because human beings are funny, actually. They really are in many ways. You know? So including yourself and myself, I say, yeah, that's very nice, but you know, don't always. We should not take ourselves too serious all the time. You know. Anyway, so this habit is a very important issue as a behavior of the human being, and then if you ask yourself again, why do they do it this way? I mean, the reproduction is easy to explain. You don't have to have a PhD to understand this. And unfortunately, in Egypt, you know, over 50% of, that's very unfortunate, of course, that women do not know how to read and write. And you don't have to tell them anything about reproduction, you know? So this is biology very clearly. However, their behavior, the behavior of social organization and how and so forth, you know? And I'm still talking about as a human being. I'm not talking about culture or anything like that. I'm not talking about A, B, C, and D. I'm talking about, I could talk about human beings who live in Alaska, human beings who live in Abu Dhabi, human beings who knows where they live, you know? They're still human beings by definition, by their needs, by their biological determinism, and what have you. I give you a little bit of a historical example, a little bit closer to home. Ibn Khaldun. Some of you know him. Ibn Khaldun was a very, I would say, first-class thinker of the 15th century. He also spent some time here in Cairo, quite a bit. Comes from Tunis, Al-Andalus, that was his family, and what have you. In Ibn Khaldun, highly interesting Muqaddimah that most people know in the translation. They're very good, 200 pages. That's the introduction of his history. He introduces the very interesting concept of asabeya. When I always ask people who are native Arabic speaking, asabeya, the older generation, they still understand a little bit. Oh yeah, I know, but this is more like the village. You know? That's what they tell me. But of course, I don't ask them. I don't tell them why I'm asking this. You know? So I asked several people. So when I tell you asabeya, what does that mean to you in Arabic? Or you know, some of them asabeya, you know, like they wonder, where do I get this stuff from? I said, no, I didn't get it from Hollywood. They wouldn't know anything about this. Anyway, the asabeya concept is a very basic concept in Ibn Khaldun and generally in his analysis of Arab society in the Berbers. As you know, he has a very fascinating account of Arab society, of the Arab people, plus also the Berbers, and you can learn enormously. This is a book of 1500 roughly, highly, highly interesting. But then when you read it very carefully with the eyes of a sociologist, a little bit philosophy here, you know, then you ask yourself, why did he hit upon this concept asabeya in the first place? Well, it's very clear. He says, asabeya is fundamental for the people to stick together, group solidarity. So the translation in English would be something like group feeling. I don't like the term collective. That has too many negative associations as far as I'm concerned. But social group is quite okay. You have a social group feeling, but also, of course, blood ties, usually family ties, you know? Meaning Ibn Khaldun describes in his works, when he analyzes Arab society, he describes basically a tribal society here. And then he says this asabeya aspect is highly important, very fundamental. He particularly goes into some details about a Bedouin, so-called Bedouin habits, Bedouins' ways of life. You notice I do not yet use the term lifestyle. Lifestyle is not fun. Lifestyle is modern. That's for later on. But a basic habit and all that. Then I ask myself, why does Ibn Khaldun choose this term and say, hey, this is the linchpin of understanding this type of tribal society? Well, it is very simple. You don't have to be a genius. All you have to do is be old enough and have a little bit of experience in life. You said, it is to survive. It's simple as that. Meaning, groups of people, first of all, individual people have a tendency, most of us, I figure, have a father and a mother. No? I mean, that's the way it is. And somehow then we are born, hopefully you are lucky enough, into a family, no? There are some people who are not so lucky. So, but we wish, of course, everybody to be born in a family, and then naturally mother, father, and then uncle, niece, and this and that and so forth. Here we have it, no? And of course, the biology is part of it, but not only. But basically, there are certain types of habits and attitudes and behaviors, social behaviors, that are very clearly set up. And I do not go into the details, but then we get into politics. I'm not on that level yet. I'm on a very fundamental, in order to survive. There's no doubt in my mind, if you study Bedouins and you know a little bit the desert, and I'm sure some of you have experienced the desert, so we have a little bit better feeling than when you only see Lawrence of Arabia, although one of my favorite movies, I have to admit. No? But still, if you smelled the desert, and if you ever smelled burnt sand, my first experience in Cairo here, in my first year, was walking right around the corner. Suddenly there was a sandstorm. I didn't know what is going on here. And within a minute or so, I was smelling burnt sand and all that. I said, aha, this was the real experience. Meaning, Bedouins, as such, as an organization, they have Asabeya for the only reason to survive. They must survive. They're in a harsh environment, what have you, and they want to survive. So I presuppose that most people, now here we have the desert and somewhere else, they have other so-called geographical landscape, that people devised methods and ways how to survive in a specific climatic conditions. Like say up in Alaska somewhere, on Iceland, where it's very cold, snow, rain, or Northern Europe, very clearly. Northern Europeans have a certain kind of habits. They may not be aware of them anymore, but they do. Very different from Southern Europeans. And some of them has something to do with not only the Alps, but has something to do with the climate, climatic conditions, of course. Imagine Cairo would have the kind of weather they would have in Northern Europe. That would be horrible, really horrible. So what I'm trying to say is, and Ibn Khaldun mentions that too, that the climatic conditions, of course agricultural, what have you, are very basic. They elicit a kind of behavior of the people, and the basic framework is very clearly mid survival. That's number one. You want to survive. And this is, you do not have to be a genius to understand this. You want to survive, and you can only survive in a good way with the group feeling, and the tribal society, which he shows very clearly, that seems to be working. Let us become a little bit more modern. So we have this Asabiya of Ibn Khaldun, and then of course he does indicate a topic that later on in modern times, say we start with the French Revolution, for instance, where he differentiates between nomadic life, nomads who move from with the sheep and this and that, to the sedentary life, meaning the life in the city, the life in the polis, the life in the town. And there he makes then Ibn Khaldun becomes a sociologist, a first-class sociologist, where he differentiates what happens to the nomads when they start hitting the city, when they start hitting the town. And then, of course, he analyzes already. You use your imagination a little bit. And he's actually telling us things that many, many years later, 500 years later, at least, Rousseau told us. I'll get to that, because Rousseau is repeating Ibn Khaldun without never having read him, when Rousseau says, what we need, all this corruption, sin, luxury, we have to do away with this. We have to go back to nature. See, the mythology of the modern mind, going back to nature. This is, of course, a mythology, very clearly. I get to that in a minute. So Ibn Khaldun already hints at some issues that we're dealing with today again, but in a different way, of course. So the difference between the urban, the city life, and the rural life and the village life is already an issue with him, meaning when the nomads start being introduced to city life, then Srbija is in danger. That becomes problematic. And then to the back door, I introduce individual freedom, of course. And that's very clear. In Srbija, you do not have individual freedom. You actually are not important as a person. You're only important as part of the group, like in a family. You know? In a family, everybody has their function, everyone have their ways of doing things, right? But that you are, say, hey, I want personal freedom and all this, this is luxury. Philosophical luxury, as I call it. And Ibn Khaldun already mentions that, of course, not in my language today, but in his own kind of language. Now, you can see these problems in terms of the basics, in terms of behaviors, survival and all this. Another example would be when Napoleon came to Egypt, for instance. I hope you know the story, but the true story, with all the facts, you know. And there you see very clearly, and this is always fascinating, when certain kinds of groups of people who totally have a different mindset, a different habit, or where they come suddenly to another so-called land, country, where they're very, very different, you know. Remember, they're still human beings. The French soldiers needed water, and the Bedouins also need water. So I'm talking on that level. You know? And then you see very clearly, of course, when you read the Vivant du Nantes, for instance, one of these savants, and the French expedition. I do not want to go into details, but those of you who want to find a very interesting story, a little bit bloody here and there sometimes, but highly significant for Egypt. Napoleon here in Egypt, highly significant, you know, despite maybe some of the negatives, but there were also very positives, and Egyptology, as you know, whatever, what a sideshow, but became the most important issue. Then you see very clearly suddenly there are problems of behaviors and all that. Here, the French soldiers come from a so-called revolutionary France. The Republic, General Kléber, who later on took over from Napoleon Bonaparte, no, was a great admirer of the Republic. Unfortunately, was assassinated later on, but still. He understood a great deal about Egyptian society and spent a lot of time understanding, but still, there are many, many differences here. You know? So here you can see when certain types of people suddenly come to other kinds of people, there are immediately problems. And the problem is not they don't dislike each other, because as human beings, the problem is they do different things in a different way. You know? And so if you have an imagination, if you think the migration problems today, they're no different from Napoleon or anything else in terms of the human beings. You know? It's quite natural. It's quite natural that you and I, you know, depending on where you come from and what you are used to, that you cannot like everybody, that you have certain people that you don't like, maybe people with large noses, you know, or people with red hair. Nobody here with red hair, okay? Stuffs like that. That's quite normal. This is not unusual, but that doesn't mean that you have to kill each other right away. Of course not. No? So these are things that are very, very fundamental. People are not angry to each other or want to kill each other and all that because you know, of fundamentals, you know, fundamentals. So every person, no matter what they are, they have a mother and a father, and I figure they like them, maybe sometimes not, but at the end they have brothers and sisters and they care about them. And you know, basically no healthy human being, certainly a young human being, wants to kill themselves. That's contrary to nature. It doesn't make any sense unless you're magnoon or have dysfunctionality in the head or what have you. No? The brainwashing stuff is a totally modern phenomenon. That's something else. We're talking about fundamentals here. What you and I basically need for everyday life, not just our water, our food and toilet and this and that, but also sociology, that we meet people, that we have friends, that we can communicate, we exchange ideas. This is the fundamental thing. And then, of course, if you do not speak the language and all this, there are additional problems. But even without a language, depending, no, you get along, but human beings understand that. Of course, if I would have been in the desert, say in the 19th century, no, with Lawrence, I'm trying to be funny a little bit, you know, and after he was much more clever, he knew Arabic and all that, he was relatively well educated as for an Englishman and all this, but then I would run around and ask the Bedouins, I need H2O, 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 and H2O, no? Nobody knows what H2O is. Yeah, but then I show the bottle, I show water. Of course, they immediately know. A human being, no matter what, needed water all the time, independent who you are, in order to survive. So I don't have to explain to you a great deal. You know, the sun is shining here, I'm sweating and all this, that I need water to survive, you know. So all my money is totally useless. For a little bit water can be worth $1 million. We tell this Mr. Trump from time to time. It can be worth $1 million. Because what good is the money if no water? No? Whatever. So, yeah, so this is an example, you know, Napoleon in Egypt as an example in this way. No? The other thing is then the problem I want to, I'll make sure that we got our time, and that is a little bit more sociology I want to introduce, and that is modern times, the introduction of the city and the introduction of money in terms of morality and freedom. I always say morality is a little bit like money. No? Money can oppress you and money can kill you, but money can always set you free. Absolutely. And morality is the same way. If you have too much morality, it will kill your spirit, whatever. You become a machine-like. No? You don't think anymore. And if you have just enough morality, then you can respect yourself. You understand yourself as a human being as such, because the object of the human being is actually, Aristotle talked about polis, being able to live in the city. I say civilization, being a civilized person, meaning the object of every human being, by definition, if he's capable of rationality, capable of understanding a little bit, empathy, what have you, is to be civilized. That's the best thing you can do. And civilized people usually have a way of communicating somehow. They not only understand the basics, but they understand sometimes the motives of the other human being. Maybe not all the details, but they do understand, this is a man, this is a woman, this is an elderly person needs help, this is a child who needs guidance, and what have you. Civilized people understand this. They're not that stupid. They understand, no? Because they are trained from the home, hopefully, and in the society, how to interact with one another. And of course, when you meet other people from different types of societies, then being civilized is, of course, the linchpin. Then you don't have a problem. There will always be some misunderstanding, of course. So the city. So this is very interesting, that along with the French Revolution, and then the Industrial Revolution in Europe and all this, the city more and more, you have to realize, or I recall myself, 1900 in the USA, most Americans live in agricultural communities. Forget about LA and Las Vegas and all this. They lived in exactly the places that voted for Trump. By the way, I'm not surprised. I assure you, I'm not surprised. That summer I was in the US and it was very clear, because nobody talked. But the TV people talked a lot, the wrong way. If you live only in New York City, maybe in Washington, D.C., or LA, and you never visited Kansas or Illinois and all that, you could not have understood what was going on, you see, of course. And so this is the issue here too, meaning the city developed more and more, meaning in Europe particularly, industrialization, modernization was introduced, economics. The people from the village in Europe, England too, and all this, obviously, they had to survive, and they start, coal mining. Of course, coal was the energy source, 19th century particularly, And then, of course, they were forced, due to the economics, what have you, to go to the city and all that. Of course, life was not always funny in all this, but the fact is that changed the demographic structure and also changed the social structure. To give you a little hint, how in everyday life, people still have children. Even the ones who came from the village and they go in the factory working, they still have children. They haven't forgotten that. The reproduction continues. Always remember, human beings don't change. If you read Aristotle, that's why we read all these people, or even Khaldun and all that, I can recognize myself when I read this. I said, oh, so I would have been a farmer in those days, or I would have been a slave maybe, maybe prince, but I'm not totally sure. You see, I can recognize as a human being, he's talking about human beings 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago. He's not talking about animals. And likewise here. That is, the city was introduced more and more, and obviously human beings still continue having children and all this. So you think about what today they call the kindergarten, or you talk about football. I'm sure some of you are football fans here. I'm talking about European football, of course. And it's very clearly that if you read a little bit the history of these activities, something had to happen to the kids. So the kindergarten very slowly in England and in Germany, later in France, was introduced to take care of the children of the working class. And then, of course, Marx appears of the proletariat. Because these were the children, otherwise, who would take care of them? If they stay in a village, then the grandparents take care of them, all that. But in modern societies, you don't have the so-called extended family anymore. This is part of the sociology, because you have to make a living somehow under modern conditions, otherwise you go hungry. It's simple as that. So the kindergarten is being introduced, what have you. And of course, people who work, they are not animals in that sense. They need to be entertained and something like that. And here we got football. If you very carefully read some of the history of football clubs, Manchester and all that, or maybe Dortmund and all these places, you will see that most football clubs were founded in the early 19th century, late 19th century. And that is not an accident. These football clubs actually were the sociology of having something aside the coal mining, what have you. And this is why Dortmund, most of you know what I'm talking about, these whole Polish workers came from Poland, migrants, they came, some of the famous ones by now. Later on they were Turkish, they came to work in the coal mines and all that. So obviously Lewandowski's grandparents, they came as coal miner people to Dortmund and all this. This is, the name already tells you this. See, these are facts that are very basic. So where the kindergarten and the football, they're connected to all of these activities. Now, a little bit on a higher level, so if you, with the city, of course, you start introducing money. And then, of course, money, as I said, has very interesting characteristics. Money can be oppressive, yes. If you have no money, too bad. Nobody wants to be poor. But money can also be a liberator, can buy you freedom, can buy you all kinds of things. So, but money is not something you can see, not really. I could take out LE or dollars, this is my, of course not. In the desert, it's nothing. And I'm sorry to say, if you take a lot of LE to Europe, they don't want to look at it. It's worthless. So money, what is money? Obviously what money is. Money is something very rational. Money is something very abstract, And in that sense, money can buy freedom. And now comes the point, with the critique of the city and the village. And now we come to, we skip things a little bit. Rousseau when the French Revolution came about, they talk about the citoyen and so forth. They talk about the emancipation from the estates and what have you. This was all very nice and all that. Of course, the women were not included, and certain kinds of other people were also not included. But the thing is, city life, Paris and what have you, more and more so into the 18th, 19th century, not to mention Versailles. And then, of course, Rousseau comes along, and remember, Rousseau was a citizen of Geneva, not unimportant, because later on, Geneva was Calvinistic. Don't forget, the Swiss, Calvinist, Martin Luther, Germany, Reformation, the fundamentalist attitudes. What we experience today is nothing new. We had this before in a different set, in a different form and different terminology. Then suddenly, of course, there was a critique. He said, the city makes people immoral. Make them immoral, sinful. Luxury is something that is sinful and all this, And usually you find among the poorer section of the society, not just in Cairo, at least they're a little bit understanding, but in every society, the poor always say the rich and the luxurious, they're sinful people. They're corrupt and all that. There's nothing new, very clearly. But they claim morality on their side. They say, I may not be rich and all that, but I'm a moral person. Don't believe them 1 minute. Don't believe it. That is very clearly a defense mechanism. It's like, well, at least I'm not rich, but at least I have morality on my side. Of course, this is nonsense. Because the fact is, morality is a survival effort. So if you go in the poorer section of time, it's quite normal, of Cairo in any time, that people are traditional, old-fashioned. They are traditional, old-fashioned, old-style stuff, whatever, because they want to survive. They don't have the money to survive anywhere else. So people everywhere in the world, not just in Cairo, everywhere, if they are on the social scale and all that, poverty and all that, they are so-called old-fashioned, all that, because they have no other means to survival. And you could say this way, to be really religious, do you have to be poor? This is nonsense, no? I know people who are very rich, they're actually religious, so-called. They know where religious belongs and that they have their whiskey later on. But they know. And I was not even talking about religion at all, because as far as I'm concerned, religion is part of the so-called, you could say, morality. Religion helps to regulate habits and so forth. Now, these habits may be praying or what have you, and human beings have found out that fasting is actually very good for the body from time to time, not just for religious purposes. And that praying sometimes is very psychologically very useful for persons. Whether you call it meditation or praying, it doesn't make any difference in terms of the name, but the psychological effect it can be very, very positive. So what I'm saying is, when Rousseau starts criticizing luxury and all that, and he says, no, we have to stop all of this nonsense, things get out of hand, we have to be serious again, honest again. Rousseau, honest again. Read his Confessions, honest again. We must return to nature. What? Fundamentalist groups today in the West and the East are saying the same thing. They're saying all this is corruption, money, and this and that, this is all. We have to go back to the fundamentals. Exactly what Rousseau said. But there is no going back to the fundamental. We still stay human beings by our needs and what we want and all that. Reproduction is still continuing, whatever, under certain, in Europe maybe they talk about non-reproductive or reproductive technologies and what have you, but they still have children, I mean, that hasn't changed, So the problem is the city, the corrupter of morality, is a typical topic that you already find it even called doing. And you find it in Aristotle too. You will always find that the city people, the police people, have a different way of surviving, a different way of doing it. And the more city there is, the more money there is, because money regulates a lot of things. That's the point. And in that sense, money is connected to the city. Why? Because money sets you free. This is why you can afford to behave in a city in a totally different way than when you were in a village, no? Basically. That's why you have Las Vegas, no? The average American, I mean, from Kansas, they all dream about going to Las Vegas one time, just to have a good time and all this, you know. They're not in for sinful life and all that. They just want to have the experience of seeing Las Vegas and all. Then you go back home to the small town in Kansas and say, you know, Las Vegas was something else. And they exaggerate and all this. But of course, then they say, of course, these people, this is impossible. Deep down, we're much more moral people. I mean, that's very exciting, but this is not my kind of life. They think they're a little bit better than the Las Vegas people because they think their morality is up. This is, of course, all nonsense, because if they had the money and the setup, they would be living in Las Vegas and not in Kansas, probably. No? Anyway, so this very clearly, I slowly down. You see very clearly this sociology, anthropology, the history, they're all they have a certain interplay. I just make a little note here, quickly, the American Western. Now, most of you have seen cowboy movies, I figure, no? It's very important. The reason why cowboy movies are so easy to figure out, but so popular, at least when I was a kid, John Wayne everywhere, you know, it's very simple. And here you have a very typical morality. American morality is actually at least the morality of those who, you know, who voted for Trump. You know? It's very clear. That's not the worst of it. That's the way. In the Western, you have a very clear cut. You got the sheriff. He represents the law, and then you get the church. The good church people, they're the moral people. They go to church every Sunday. They pray, right? And then they have the wife of the sheriff is, you know, very dressed very modestly, you know? And then you get the cowboy. The cowboy has the white hat and the black hat, meaning there's the good guy and the bad guy. Very simple. You do not have to think this way. And then, of course, you have sin. And what is the sin in the Western movies? The saloon. The French, of course, say salon. No? But in American, you say saloon. And what do you have in the saloon? You have drinking going on, you got gambling going on, and you got, how should I put this politely, dancing girls. And they represent sin. That's the Western, and it always works. It's very easy to look at the Western, you know exactly who are the good people, who are the bad guys, and who are the so-so ladies, and who is the proper lady. Very simple, over and over again. And this is, again, a kind of morality, no? Kind of morality. And it's interesting, my last word, because we're getting a little bit, if you look at the last election in the USA, and not to mention Turkey, I lived in Turkey for several years, so I know a little bit the insights. It's very interesting. If you look at the map of Turkey in the USA, it's interesting. I noticed that immediately because I lived in Ankara and all this. I know the place pretty well. You know, I also lived in Colorado one time. You wouldn't believe that. So I know from experience the difference between New York City and Colorado, and I know the difference between Istanbul and Anatolia. No? I've been in the villages, Anatolia, wonderful people, but still, now the fact is this. If you look at very carefully, that the periphery of Turkey, with Istanbul going all the way down to Izmir, Mediterranean, they all voted against him. All voted against him. Even Ankara voted against him. But everything in the middle, you know, in the middle, the so-called Anatolia voted for him, 80%, you know. You look in the USA, the West Coast, the East Coast, they all voted against him, and then in the middle, sort of, they all voted for him, plus minus. So this is a very interesting, and if you analyze two societies, you find similar attitudes. Yeah? Whether you're American or Turkey doesn't make any difference. It's the attitude. You know? So what I'm trying to hint at is the following. If you look at morality from a fundamental point of view and a universal point of view, morality is a necessity to organize habits, institutions, what have you, in order to survive. You know? And then freedom is something extractional, meaning freedom is something that is an achievement that can be achieved through a certain type of morality, and this is of course why young people are usually the ones who want to break out of this morality. You know? They want to be free. You know? When you look at the demonstration, you always see 90% always young people. You don't say 50-year-old men. No, usually don't. And all that, no? Older people, they have other things to do than go demonstrating. No? They got bills to pay. They worry about grandchildren and I don't know what. So the freedom aspect is directly tied somehow a little bit to the city. I'm reminded, there's a famous German saying, I will translate, from the medieval times. Sounds a little bit ironic saying that about Cairo when you're in Cairo. The German says, Stadtluft macht frei. City air makes free. I mean, in Cairo. But in those days, because in Europe, the city had a very special development compared to the East. And the city was the oasis of freedom for many people, particularly the financial classes, the commercial classes. And this is why money and freedom and the city are interconnected. And of course, the morality in which people live in the city is a very different one than from the village and all that. That doesn't make these people more immoral or less immoral. It's just a matter of how you survive. You have to reconsider. If you think about Saudi Arabia, footnote, say 100 years ago, right? And their style of life and everything, how did they survive? And inshallah, oil came, which was discovered by the British and everybody else. So they were lucky. It's simple as that, they were lucky. You understand? That was not their own doing, they were just lucky, right? And now, of course, other people start doing research, science, and they pick up, and then suddenly we have solar energy and all that, and slowly we know the era of the oil is going down more and more, meaning now we have solar energy because that's the product of science, of course. No? So what I'm trying to hint at is these changes happen. My last word on this is little quick example, Srbija, which I love. You know, as a architectural historian, I like this stuff. Now, obviously, the Srbija had a certain function in the house, of people, the harem and all that, Yeah, but I always say to my class, what good is the Srbija when she suddenly has an iPhone? See, the Srbija and iPhone, they don't work together. It doesn't make any sense. Obviously, you don't have a Srbija anymore. So what I'm trying to hint at is, with new technologies, we have to adjust our so-called morality to what is given. We're in the middle of this now. You see, I'm a little bit older than you are, So I don't have an emotional relationship to my computer, anything like that. It's just a machine. I always hope I don't have to use it and all that. I even have an iPhone 7. My son gave it to me, showed me how to use it a little bit. I feel like I'm a guy with a Stone Age mentality and driving a Maserati a little bit, He's helping me, but I have a sense of humor about it. You understand what I mean? I rather talk to person, I get more out of it, But we have the internet, and these are technologies we start using. Nobody forces anybody to use internet. Nobody forces anybody an iPhone and all that. And nobody had asked the Bedouins to adopt a Mitsubishi truck. You could say, why don't you, camel is much more nice and romantic. Read Lawrence, what he says about the camel and all this. But you and I know very clearly. So what's happening is We as human beings, we stay the same in our basic setup as a species, but the technology, of course, forces us, and we usually develop technology to make life better for us from a practical point of view. No? In my last little word, I really quit then, I have, anyway, it's very clearly, in the good old days, right, when they had call to prayers, right, I don't think they have microphones in those days. You see? So how come some people use microphones today? Not to mention church bells and all that kind of stuff, Not to forget the synagogue, of course. Do you understand what I'm saying? Well, these things are adopted because they're useful. And every human being adopts certain technologies that are useful. As simple as that. Make life easier. We have automobiles because it makes it easier for us than to walk all the time. Human beings do that, irrespective of what culture you come from. In the old days, they used caravans, Caravans. Medina and all that, right? Mecca, right? Caravans. Three months here from Cairo, 3 months, 4 months, who knows what, right? And today, these same people, they use the airplane. And most of them probably have no idea why airplanes stay up in the air. But they use them anyway. And nobody says, this is immoral to use the airplane to fly to Mecca, right? Only people who are not okay in their head, who are dysfunctional, would say something like that. The fact is, it's much easier. And then you have air conditioning the whole show. What I'm trying to hint at, the morality as such is always there and needs to be adopted, needs to be adjusted. And morality is a necessity for human beings as rational beings to survive. And freedom is a luxury in a kind of way, but it is possible, but it takes a lot of effort on part of this rational animal to develop this. And most societies, they do not grant freedom to their members. They do not. Very clearly not. Because otherwise they feel that they cannot survive. And this is the reason why I would say we are with a little bit luck. Right now we have a little bit problem. People, they follow Rousseau, they say, let's go back to nature. Of course, it's all nonsense. You cannot go back. Why should you, if you have an iPhone and a mobile phone and you have a computer, why should you want to go back and live in the Mashrabiyah? It doesn't make any sense, in the harem. It doesn't make any sense. So you know very well, hey, wait a minute, life goes on. I want to live a good life. And with all the niceties, necessities, we live longer, medicine has improved, this and that. So we just have to adjust. But there are many, many people who are not capable of that adjustment. They don't understand that. They get nervous and all that. And so the people who voted for Brexit, who voted for Trump, who voted for the other guy, these are people, they're not so sure. They don't like the new ways. It's going too quickly. Deep down, they know they're not going to stop the world, So they say, hey, wait a minute, but as long as I'm still alive, 10, 20 years, I want to live my old style of life a little bit. Let the young ones they can live their own life, but not when I'm alive, If I want to put it this way, tough luck. So there's an in-betweenish going on right now. And the reason, of course, makes it more difficult is because we have internet and all that. Now we cannot do this secretly. Imagine we would not have, and those of you who are a little bit older, they know a life without internet and they know a life without iPhone. I remember very well, and I must say my life was excellent. I didn't miss it. Much more stressful for me today with internet and all that stuff. I try to ignore it if it's possible, But I still have to adjust. So I'm saying is morality in such way is not something about that a person is good or bad in all this. This is a matter of things that we have to adopt in order to be civilized, And freedom is basically, you could say, a footnote product of if we do a good way of morality. If we do a bad way of morality, there is no freedom. And with bad way morality, there is oppression everywhere. I don't want to name names. I don't need to tell you these things, what I'm talking about. And these are facts. I better quit now because I talked. It's 7 o'clock. Okay. So So if anybody have a few questions, we can still discuss this.
Start questions and debate.
Thank you, sir, for the fascinating layout. In the beginning of talk, you said you'll talk exclusively about human beings.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned the village and the city, and that's the driving.
Can you hear him? Oh, okay. I just want to make sure.
And that's the driving force for what you call morality is العصبية, or that tribal feeling. And in the city is the need to have a more beautiful life. I kind of see these things as very passive. It's like the nature which is driving this, and in here there is no big difference from animals. And these things, in order to have a human being to obey these things, he has to be very passive to the surrounding. And here's a choice, the freedom of a choice. It's like you don't talk about them very much. The tribe or the city and the needs. This is a thing. Another thing, if you take a very, very old society, which is actually a mix of a village and a city, like the old Egyptians. They have a more higher standards than just عصبية or just a better use of life. They have some phrases which is, when James Henry Preston wrote The Dawn of Conscience, he wondered, we now are not on the same level with them. And so the first point, this is not so human. It's like there is very passive feeling in the driving force and the people who are adopting the driving force. If you can comment on this.
Thank you very much. I think I understand what you're hinting at. There's a very interesting comment in Aristotle too. The guy, you have to read him, he's great. By the way, in many of the courses in the US and everywhere in France, you're still, if you study political science and all this, there's a course in AUC Political Art 300 where you condemned to read Politics of Aristotle, at least 50 pages. The whole thing is 300 pages. I would say the following, yes. See, the problem, of course, in terms of animal and not animal, of course, you always have to realize, as you say, we see they have better, higher standards and this and that, so forth. But most people, of course, always think that the people who so-called have higher standards, they see this on TV or media, what have you, that they're also better people. Of course, they're not. And this is where this analogy comes that you're always found everywhere. I mean, if you're a poor person, you have no money, right? I mean, what have you got to offer to the world? Nothing, actually. And don't misunderstand what I mean by that, you know? We're not living, as I said, in the times of Ibn Khaldun. We're living now, 21st century. Then it's very clear, whether you like it or not, everybody seeks to have a better life. You know? And of course, I didn't even mention education, all these things. Of course, no, of course not. But the fact is also, good education also costs money. You know? I mean, we might as well say so. You know? And so obviously, it's not so easy for people who find themselves being poor in all this, you know. Do you think it would make sense that I go to Mbaba and give a lecture there to the people there? You will translate for me why they are poor? Why they are poor? Should I go there? I mean, there would be troubles, you know that. But I could do that with great sympathy. I went to Mbaba once or twice. It's not as though I'm not going to these places. My first few years, and I know, used to walk all over the place with my son, by the way, when I was babysitting with him. I spent in hotels in Cairo and to these places. Anyway, what I'm saying is, the people are not that stupid. They understand a little bit, I mean, that they are poor and compared to this and that. But sometimes they don't always understand why they are poor. And being a poor person is not a matter of inshallah and all this. No, we can say that, no? And they do not understand the mechanism, they do not understand so and so. But of course, in order to survive even on that level, they need morality in all this. Of course, if you're on a so-called higher level, meaning you have more money, you have more time, not to mention time, more luxury, then you see immediately, of course, where the problem is. You see that. And then, of course, if with money and everything else, this is also a problem in Egyptian society. Sooner or later, you cannot stop money here, and you cannot stop all kinds of things, whether you like it or not. You know? New technology will be introduced. And then the younger people, of course, they will have many, many more opportunities. You know? April 2011 would never have been possible. I live in a garden city, I know. Never would have been possible without the internet, never. You know? Now it would not be possible. They know about it now. You see? So what I'm trying to say is that there's always this, you know, situation. And if you go to Europe, of course, where things are very different from a social angle by many people, you see, they're no different people than you and I and all the ladies there. It's just they have the opportunity. The conditions are such, you know, that they can live the way they want to live. Now, whether their decision, whether they want to live is a good way or not way, that's besides the point. As long as they do not bother other people in all this. You know? So I understand. All I'm saying is we find ourselves in a situation right now, it's a bit more difficult. And remember, a great many of people are still massively ignorant about other people. You know? I mean, this is a big problem. So I think the next 50 years is, first of all, understanding what's going on. Everybody understands money, and everybody understands weapons and military. You see, and education takes time. Not yesterday, this takes a whole generation, 20 years. And so that's why the difficulties are there, so forth. Yes. So,
Okay.
say something.
Questions?
Maybe you want to say something. Oh, we solved everything. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
It seems like you're making an implicit distinction between morality and this other thing. I think you just put it in answering this gentleman's question.
Oh, the Asabeya thing. Oh,
Yeah, okay, well, fellow feeling, but you said something like discussing. So, for example, a key feature of your talk had to deal with the interrelationship between morality and freedom, and you were talking about these things as if they were conflict.
Yeah.
And this sort of presupposed, it seemed to me, a distinction between what we might call like ethics, or worrying about how one ought to live one's life in the best possible way, and morality on the other hand, which appears to be some
Yeah.
kind of, on your interpretation perhaps, some kind of culturally determined set of rules, perhaps somewhat arbitrary set of rules, though overall designed to keep social cohesion.
No.
I was wondering if you could say something about this.
Yeah. No. What
It seemed like you were
I understand the thing. See, I specifically did not use the vocabulary ethics and all that because that's a different stage. I wanted to speak very fundamentally, no, of why do we have morality in the first place. I was not even considering what should we do about ethics, whether this is good or bad and all this, though, because, you know, Lawrence, what was his name? I almost forgot him, but Kohlberg and people like that, you know, self-development, all that. The thing is, look, if you look at a child, the child grows up, the child has no idea who he is or she is. No? They don't even know what language they speak. No? So you know very well, and this is highly interesting, that when you talk about ethics, morality, young persons are the least qualified to understand this. And we happen to know that it's interesting, it's very slowly when they turn into 12, 13, 14, 15 slowly, and then certainly by the time they're 15, 16, they're beginning to discuss, why does my father act so funny way to me, no? Or why does she say this and that? They ask you, what's the purpose of this? You know? I don't do anything bad in all this. Why do I have to go home at 11 o'clock? I mean, You know, and that doesn't make any sense and all that. What I'm trying to hint at is the sense of morality. We're not born with the sense of morality, and we're not born with the sense of ethics whatsoever. We are, in that sense, though, animals. Meaning children are, I know that doesn't sound nice, but it are kind of animal-like in terms of education levels. A child doesn't know what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. A little kid, they say so, no, because the father says so, the mother says, they just ape, they imitate. Right? But and this is the reason why particularly younger people in their teenager years, between 13 and 19, they have so many problems and so many questions because they live in a different conditions. No? Most of you were born with the internet, you were born with the iPhone. I was not. I was born almost at the time when television was discovered. No? I'm trying to be funny, you know, black and white and all that. I never saw television until I was 10 years old. No? So I don't have this feeling. You know? I know a world without television. I'm not joking. No? So I know the differences. So what I'm trying to hint at is I first want to get to the fundamentals, you know? And of course, we could discuss 10 hours. Then the idea, what is good, what is bad, and all this. This is, of course, a matter of decisions as to, I still would maintain the basic morality as to what is good for the survival of the group or not. I'm pretty sure of that. Despite of what you have, this is why the problem of migration and all that, you know. I mean, when you follow this, what's going on in Europe, it's the hysteria sometimes and all this, and of course, at the end, it's always the flus, you know, the money, you know, and you see what kind of people come here, heavens, you know. When American soldiers came in 1945 to Germany, right, you know, and there's still about 50,000, 100,000 American soldiers in Germany. Do you think they're considered foreigners? Of course not, because most of them are white. And even the black ones are not, they're now adopted. What I'm trying to hint at, if these migrants, independent, you know, come with money and you know, Rolls Royce and all that, nobody would bother. Do you understand? You know exactly what I'm saying. No? The fact is, the Europeans, if you want to put it this way, got the wrong refugees and they got the wrong migrants. They're poor, most of them, and all that. The US is a little bit lucky and Canada is more clever. No? They know what they want. What I'm trying to hint at is, you see, basically, you know, then when the people come to these countries, obviously that they stuck to their religion, they stuck to their ways of doing it, you know, family-wise, that makes sense. Why should they adopt the German way or the French way and all this when they know they don't know what to do with this? Because their structure is not set up, their understanding is not set up this way. This takes adjustment. So what I'm saying is we've forgotten a little bit about the very basics. We can talk about culture and I don't know what, but I still maintain, despite all the cultural differences, religion and what have you, the bottom line is still this morality which I outlined a little bit. And that is a necessity because without that, we are animals. We cannot survive. Then you, yes.
So I guess one question I would ask is, are you sort of amenable to a kind of contractarian theory of ethics or morality, let's say? So are you thinking of morality as a kind of bargain that we engage in, given that we're all sort of aiming at our survival? Could you
Yeah, I mean, I would say first. Yeah, I would say first of all, I mean. Family members, you know, you start being a family member, you know, not an individual. They see very well. I mean, I'm a little bit very bad at this. I'm a single child, so you know. But most of you, particularly in Egypt, they all have 5 brothers and 6 sisters. I'm trying to exaggerate a little bit. They see immediately. I would ask each one of you have brothers and sisters, and I ask you. I mean, I'm the foreigner, but I'd ask you, what is your position in your family? You know very well whether your father likes you more than your brother or the sister, and this and that. You know this very well. You know this very well, no? So this is part of the morality. You act accordingly, but you don't always like what your parents say or the environment, but you say, okay, meaning a little bit bargaining in the sense, I want to survive well, they're nice to me, but there are limits. And in every morality, even in the ones that I'm talking about of survival, there are limits, of course. You're not allowed to kill somebody just so you don't like their face and all that. You will be killed, finished. It's very simple, See, and then, of course, we don't want to have this, that you're just killed because somebody doesn't like your face or what you say. So we have to bargain in that sense within the family, and you have to bargain with other people a little bit. Because essentially, I'm convinced of this based on my life experience and not all the books I read. That is, nobody wants to be killed just like that. If you're a healthy person, and you want to live life, and as Aristotle, you don't just want to exist, you want to live a life, not like a rock. You don't want to just, you want to live a life, then obviously you have to consider other so-called people and see what the situation is, and you bargain a little bit, yes, of course.
You do think of kind of, at least intersubjective stability.
Yes, of course. But I think that within the family and within the society, there is such a thing as quote unquote some objective value sets that should be kept up. When I say objective, that doesn't mean it's objective in the sense that's forever. Of course not, because things are changing with technology. But always the reference is always the limit how we can survive. I know this may sound a little bit simple-minded, but I'm convinced human beings, they are still simple-minded because that's all we got. I mean, I cannot change myself, and I cannot change you. I don't want to change you. You're a nice guy, You know what I mean? We want to laugh together, have a good time, but we have our interests, And I cannot do anything. I look in the mirror, I am the way I am, so what, Maybe next time I'll be a lizard, who knows, or a cat or a dog, I don't know. But my body that I have in me, that's all I've got, and I have to do the best I can. And that right, when you talk about rights now, of course, every human being should have too, But this is difficult to convey to other people when you get in contact and all this, you see. So it's a little bit in betweenish, But I'm pretty convinced that we've lost sight of this a little bit, Because when you watch very carefully, there are guys running around TV and all that, they still have watches, They didn't have to have watches, What I'm trying to say is they all look for the conveniences, no matter who it is, of making life a little bit better, See, so there's much open space for that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I understand.
And the things that are high and that modify this natural stuff. This what people call morality, the modifiers, which, for example, I can take that right formulation if that right is going somewhere that don't fit my objective. Here, I think I am moral and that right is wrong. And I am disagreeing with that right, disagreeing with the natural feeling of abiding to that right.
Yeah.
What I call morality.
Yeah, I understand this very well, but see, the best teacher is always, in that I agree with Aristotle. I like Plato very much, but I agree with him. Experience in life is the best teacher. Forget about books and all that, really. Experience in life. And if you observe human beings around the world, I lived in 7 societies, I actually did, for several years, so I like to think of myself, I know a little bit better than the average interviewer, and I keep my eyes open. You always see the same thing over and over again. People act according to their interests and they want to have a better life than they have. Meaning, you don't have to be rich and all that, but they want to have a better life. Either you have money, but you live in a society where, there's not very much freedom going on, but so you want to do something. And China, you see the same problem here too. They have a big problem in the future, China, internal problem. You have 1,300,000,000 people. Well, heavens, and if they define a middle class in China as 300 million people so far, heavens, Egypt has about 90 million people now. Germany has 80 million. This is peanuts. We're talking about 300 million people, middle class, and they're all into internet and all this. I mean, what is going to come? Meaning, what I'm trying to hint as, they all want to have a better life. So I do not disagree with you. I know exactly what you're talking about, but the fact is, this fundamental is still operating on this. So, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
This largely applies to average passive people who are not philosophized. For example, if you take someone like Jesus, one who suffered to deliver his message or whatever, he saw that this is the truth. That's not an average people.
No.
That he suffered, not seek a good life, a better life like the 300 million. I agree with you that these are the average, passive people, which we should not make them the parameter of morality.
No, I understand.
I think we should make the parameter of morality those very high human beings, those superhuman beings.
Yeah, no, I understand. You're talking about the ideals. I have no problem with this, but when you open your eyes, no matter where you go and say, no matter how religious a person is, or less religious, or nationalistic, or whatever, you always see the same phenomenon, And I do know some Turkish friends, I see this in their families, I see this in Egypt, everywhere. Everybody's trying to have a strategy in all that, at least so that their children have a better life, whatever that means. So you can be, say, a very religious person, you have ideals and all that, okay, but the fact is, you see that you may be poor and all this, and you don't want your children to live on that poverty level, And you know very well, praying is always good for the soul and all this, but that doesn't pay your rent, as this famous saying, God loves him who works, This is, of course, a Calvinistic attitude. Praying is good, but also work, and not inshallah all the time. You have to work at it, And when you're an adult, you know this. If you're a little bit older and you have children and this, you know very well. And you want very clearly. One doesn't have to be a genius to know this. That your children. That's what I'm talking about. That of course that the children need guidance on it. This is very clear. That they need guidance, of course. So this is a dilemma we're in today. Because of the internet and social media and all that, other people see in the most remote area of the world, very poor and everything, You get old-style television programs, You click and then you see a documentation of all the poor down somewhere in Africa somewhere, and then the next click is there's the European League Championship, and everybody is excited and all that. That's luxury because they don't have to worry about food and all. See, a very strange situation. Do you understand what I mean? So I think we agree on a certain level. Our problem may be what kind of method and strategy could you use in order to make this a little bit more habitable. Of course, it would be a mistake to believe that I say, we are all animals. Of course, that's too simple. No, of course, we're not, but we are, if you want to use the language, animal-like sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. I love my cats and I love my dogs, but not only. And so I think you and I, we would have to find a strategy. How can we reconcile this animal-like characteristics, and then on the level of what kind of morality do we want to develop in order to reach a certain type of ideal, which we will never reach, of course, but that's why it's an ideal. No, okay, yeah. You have a question?
Okay. So I sort of agree and disagree with you both. So I do think morality could be looked at from two perspectives. So from one perspective, we can think of an individualistic morality, and from the other, we can look to morality from a social point of view. So if we look to a social or a religious morality, morality is very much interest driven. So it's basically what is socially more beneficial to the group as a whole. But if we look to morality from an individualistic point of view, it can go both ways. It could go in interest-based, could go with like going with the society because it's much more beneficial, or even playing with the social rules in order to act with the society and against the society and win from both sides. But it can also go with the idea of special people having a certain different moral system and going against the flow and even losing from it against their own interests. But when we look to it from a social or to a social or religious morality, we can see somehow that it is very much interest-driven. And interest-driven is not a bad thing, actually. It can be both bad thing and a good thing. So if basically morality causes a society to get destroyed because of its own morality, then there is something wrong with the morality itself. It means that basically the morality is unable to make the human beings happy. That doesn't mean that the morality would be a bad thing, but it would be like an alert that it might be not the good way to go. This is one thing. The second is concerning the issue of animals. I'm sort of very much skeptical about animals being amoral. I do think that animals might be moral agents, but they might have a different moral system than what we think of as a moral system. So what we need as human beings as a form of a moral system might be very different than theirs. So some actions we might consider immoral in our society as human beings because they cause damage might not be the same in an animal-like society. So that animals could have some sort of so for example, a lot of animals obey the lead of the tribe, what could be considered a lead of the tribe. Obeying the lead could be a form of a morality, but it is very beneficial to those animals. I don't see why we should be judging whether animals have a moral code or not. We could just act as if they are that we are moral agents, but we cannot judge whether animals are moral agents or not. I'm more inclined to say they are, but I'm very skeptical towards just throwing amoralism on animals just because they don't fit what we consider a moral code.
Oh, I could respond. I heard happiness, which I didn't mention. Well, that's exactly the point. You know? Remember, I have 2 dogs and 3 cats. So and when I was a student, I used to take my basset hound called Dante with me to a class. I got special. That was in Europe, special permission. So, well, that is the point. If you use the term happiness, for instance, I don't see that you can describe a dog or cat happy in all this, not in that sense. But human beings understand very well the expression, what it means to be happy, if it's only for 1 minute or I don't know what. And this is the issue. Morality is not here to make you happy. That's the whole idea. No? It can be very useful that you feel secure. As I said, human beings have a very, very strong sense. They need to have a security. No? That they, they have a space that you're not being killed and what have you. No? So happiness is something special, and I would like to say that happiness has nothing to do with satisfaction. Quickly, I had three kids there. You know, I have a chocolate, and then I like one kid more than the other. You know how it is. And then I give the 2 kids, and I get the third one a little bit more. I say there's a 4th one. Immediately say to me, "Oh, why did you give him more than me?" No. And I said, "Well, okay, you caught me. Yeah. So why don't we talk about justice now?" But of course, he's not interested in justice. He wants to know why did you give him more than me? So the only way I can handle this situation, I have to give him the addition so that he's happy with that. Happy, he's satisfied with it. But the boy is not interested now in justice or happiness, and he just wants that, what you give him, you know? So happiness is one of those things that we as human beings are capable of very clearly. And as they always say, you know, money doesn't make happy. Well, it does help a little bit. I mean, it does help a little bit, meaning the condition as such. And I cannot believe for 1 minute that a person who's poor all the time, that they can really be happy in that understanding. Yes, please. Please, yes.
I want to add something. Eminem once said that money doesn't buy happiness, it buys crazy is happiness.
Yeah. There's also a German saying that says, well, money may not make you happy, but it makes you calm down. Yeah, that's right. No, so, I mean, and I do not like this idea that people say bad things about money, because money is not something there. Money is abstract, as you know. But money is something very positive. If you use it in a strategic, tactical, very well way, I mean, it is. And I identify money with freedom, as simple as that. And I'm very sorry that there are a lot of people who are very poor. I mean, what can I do? But at least I can say it in public, and we can do what we can do. But the whole idea is condemning money as being immoral and all this is nonsense. Because I'd rather live in a society where there's a little bit money than in a society where everybody is poor. And this is the reason, that's my personal opinion, why socialism never works and never will work. You know? Because what good is it? You know, when everybody is poor, ironically, those who determine what socialism is, they usually are not poor. We know this in East Germany and all that. At the end, it's always the same game. Those people who say, you should not do this and this, you should be moral and all this, no? And then, I do not say names, when you observe them in Europe, you notice they're very different from what they talk about at home, you know? So what I'm trying to hint at, money is, as far as I'm concerned, emancipatory factor. It just has to be used in the right way. And as I repeat again, money is like morality. You can kill somebody with money, but you can also make somebody, quote unquote, happy in a kind of way, but not excessive. You know? And this is exactly what human beings are capable of. You and I, we know the differences here. But an animal in that sense would never know that, you know? And I mean, aside from that, you know, my animals, they love me. I spent more money on my animals probably than the average Egyptian family has to live to eat, you know? I'm sorry to put it this way, that's true. You know? Do you know how expensive dog food is? Yeah. So you know. You know, and not dog food, cat food, I hope, since I know you have a sense of humor with the right kind of understanding, that's why I can mention it here. I talk this way in Baba, they'll get me out of town, you know? Anyway, so I think there are issues that can be debated and have to look at it, and I'm still convinced, despite everything else, the reaction, what they call fundamentalism and this and that, conservatism or populism in Europe there and all that, is a reaction. I'm not totally surprised. When the internet came along, I said, oh, it's not going to be paradise. I know that immediately. Because it's really like that. The British have two sayings, and I remember to say, my home is my castle. Well, this is wonderful if you have a castle. But if you don't have a castle, what is this? Or they say, good fences make good neighbors. And again, having a fence of your own, that means you presuppose that you own land, right? Yeah, but if you don't have land, what good is the fence? You know? I mean, the British are nice people, funny and all that, but you know, this kind of stuff. But today, we're all sort of living in apartment buildings. And I'm not talking about just Cairo, and we have to figure out a kind of way to be civilized in all this, you know? And this is very important. It can be done through education and all this, but still the fundamentals in terms of morality is still, as long as we're human beings. Remember, we're not nothing else, just human beings. That hasn't changed. Why would we want to read Aristotle or even Carl Jung even today? Some students say, well, Doc, this is where 500 years ago is old-fashioned. I said, please read it. You will find out there are many, many things that haven't changed. We as human beings don't change. The conditions are changed under which we live, but we as human beings, as a species, if we are in all this, we don't change. We have to learn, obviously we have to learn to reorganize, reform. And today, of course, you have more and more people who want to participate in this. The people who are fundamentalists, they don't say the world is bad. Not really, they say we want to be part of this world, And then if 10% in the world is having a pretty good time and the rest have to eat sand, then obviously there must be something wrong, in terms of the morality. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just wondering about it. Moral cause, it could be natural causes somehow.
Again, I'm sorry. Go ahead. The mo-
Moral cause, it could be natural causes.
Huh?
Natural causes.
Yeah.
Just wondering about it. First question.
Yeah, of course, but you usually find that depending on how experienced a society is, remember, it's not just individuals who get old or get a little bit older, mature, but also societies. If societies are very old, are very mature in all this, then you usually find that they usually have very clear-cut codes to go by. And the problem with these societies is, of course, obviously, if there's new technology being introduced and all this, and remember, the technology is being accepted by anybody if it's favorable to our lives. If it helps you and I to live a better life. Medicine, we don't say, medicine is the devil. If it helps to save your mother or whatever, you will take it no matter what. That's what I'm talking about. And this is a big problem if you have societies whose ethical code is very solidified, that they are not capable or they have to find a way to adjust and revise their code in order to survive that code. That is everybody, that this has nothing to do with East and West and all that. This is the reason why in Northern Europe and America and all that, some of these people, the so-called silent majority and all that, suddenly voted. You never heard of these people for a very long time. They voted and they say, hey, listen, we don't like this new stuff anymore and this talk, and I don't want to go in details, or Brexit, Remember, the great majority of people in England who voted, they don't live in London and all that. They live outside in their cottages and this and that, and say, hey, listen, this is too much for us and all this, take it easy here, we want the British way of life a little bit kept and all this. So this is quite normal. These people are not bad. They're not, you understand, I understand them very well, but the problem is, it has to be understood, hey, we have to talk on both sides. So the moral codes have to be adjusted and changed. Nobody will survive by staying with the moral code their grandfathers had in all this. You understand what I mean by that, You see, it has to be adjusted. Or the next generation will do it for you. Your children will do it for you, whether you like it or not. And of course, revolutions happened when that moral code is being strictly adhered to, and there are certain kind of people say, hey, wait a minute, this moral code is not promoting my interests, particularly as a young person and all that, And it's not an accident that it was the internet and the mobile phone that organized all these things a little bit, of course. And who were these people? They're usually younger people. Of course, yeah, please, I'm sorry.
I have a question that's been on my mind for a little bit. Like when we're born, we don't have a rationalizing system. We don't know how to ration things, and to a certain degree
We learn slowly.
We learn slowly how to ration things.
Yes, of course, yes.
But the things we receive before we know how to ration, we take them as granted, like things we're told by our parents, so on and so forth.
Exactly. The idea is like a, how should I put this? I give exactly what you say. Meaning, I had a very different life the first 40 years or whatever than my son has. My son was born in Turkey. I'm talking about myself so that I don't talk from books, from reality. He was born in Turkey, was 6 months old. I brought him to Cairo. Okay, for whatever reason, illness, whatever, he left 4 years ago. He's still in good contact. Egypt, he's not Egyptian, all that, but Egypt is in his mind. Do you understand what I'm saying? Meaning his life started in Egypt, actually. And believe me, I had no idea about Egypt till I was 40. I mean, I knew about the pyramids, of course. Yeah. No? But do you understand? So each generation, depending on where they were born, what parents they have and all this, they started very different. Of course, there's rationality always, like language you learn, right? But the consciousness of who you are, what language you speak, and all that becomes very, very late. And very often, I mean, it's unfortunate, there are some adults who never get it. They're born, they work, and they die, and they never knew who they were. Because they thought, well, everything was okay. Maybe many, many years ago, but in our kind of world, this is impossible. You know? In that sense, of course, I agree with you, meaning we're